Welcome back to my channel, dear friends. This is Taz from Taslima Maya Art. Thank you so much for being here to support my channel of all things creative, ranging from acrylic pouring, fluid art, mixed media art, texture art, resin art and sculpture flowers. If you'd like to become a patron and support this channel, please find the link down below in my description box. I am excited to tell you that this week I have two guest artists with me. Up after me is the wonderful Kat's Fluid Art Creations, and up after her will be Sheldon Briscoe of Shell Rock Art. We are all focusing on doing cloud pours for this collaboration. I really hope you enjoy it. So my friends, in today's video we'll be talking about how to succeed in a cloud pour. Now, most of us who've been acrylic pouring for a while have probably tried many different acrylic pouring techniques, and the cloud pour is absolutely beautiful to look at for those who have mastered it. But many of us still have spectacular fails, so let's talk about why that might happen. Mistake number one is the wrong paint consistency. Now you'll see me mixing up some paints in the background for a pour I did, and I actually got the paint consistency to be really thin. That is the first mistake. If it's too thin, you're going to have a lot more blending between the colours and you won't get that distinction. If you prefer the blended look, that's fine, but mostly it just turns into one big runny, messy paint pour that is not something that you intended initially. Ideally, paint consistency has to be on the thicker side for a cloud pour, so you have to have a bit of a trace. 3 seconds trace is normally a good way to go. The paint can't be way too thick or way too thin, so for a cloud pour the paint should be flowing well but still have body. If it's too thick, it won't spread properly and it'll be very hard to tilt it, and if it's too thin, colours will blend too much, muddying the cloud effect. Problem number two to avoid is having too many air bubbles in your paint. If you've mixed up your paints, you should really let them sit and disperse the bubbles overnight and pour the next day rather than too soon to avoid this problem. Another way to fail at a cloud pour is to incorrectly layer the colours. Putting the wrong colours next to each other or just throwing in colours without any thought to layering can create an outcome where colours clash or your pour turns easily muddy. For example, too many primary colours together might create a muddy pour. So try to create a conscious palette where colours complement each other or look good together. And decide how you will sandwich your cloud mix in between specific colours, because your cloud is likely to take on some of the hints or hues of the colours adjacent to it. And this is the point where your creativity kicks in and you can start imagining up and dreaming up wonderful colour palettes and clouds that go lovely next to other types of colours. Next, error number 4 is layering too little paint in your cup. This is something I kept doing when I started out, and I found that you couldn't really see bands of colour in your final pour. You could only see very slight lines of colour, so be very specific in terms of what you want. If you want wider bands of colour, put in more paint into your cup in the layers. So less is not always more, trust me. Now, point 5 is the incorrect cloud mix recipe, and as you know, there are so many recipes out there across the world using different types of products. Find the recipe that works for you and test and practice on a small test tile to make sure your recipe works. Now, in this particular pour that you're watching, I had the wrong balance of ingredients in my cloud pour mix, and for that reason I had a horrible outcome with a lot of flocculation. Now, flocculation is when your paint kind of separates and you can see it's very bitty and gritty, and it really kind of ruined this painting to a certain extent. So you'd see it at the end. I do wish I tested my cloud pour mix. It had been sitting for a couple of months and I hadn't checked it, and for that reason I had this very bad result. So my advice would be to use a mix that you know works and you've tried and tested it on a test tile before you do your final pour. Now, tip number 6 on how to avoid failing on a cloud pour is not to use too many transparent colours if you're using a black base. Now, I've learnt this the hard way and it might be different for other artists, but when I've had a black base, or use black as a flow extender. If I had too many transparent colours, that black would actually still pop through afterwards when the painting was dry, making it an overall dark painting, so just be aware of that. So being forewarned is always being forearmed. Using white is sometimes better if you've got darker transparent colours. Mistake number 7 is improper pouring technique. So when you're pouring out your cup, make sure you start low and then you can go high and back low and use those motions, but you need to be very steady. Don't pour out too fast or too slow. Keep the tilting motion of your cup consistent, and you can also turn your canvas as well for a special effect. So at this stage you're really looking at the pattern and the design, and you're tilting your canvas or turning your canvas the way you want to create the pattern that you want. You will begin to see the tendrils forming as you do on here, and you can really decide which way to go by looking at that carefully. Pouring the paint haphazardly or too quickly results in an uncontrolled pour, and it doesn't look as good. Also, dumping the paint quickly into one spot can destroy any chance of cloud formation. Cloud pours require a controlled slow pour, often in a spiral or controlled drip. So you'll need to practice this. Number 8, tilting too fast or unevenly. Now, tilting itself is an art that needs to be slowly mastered. I still struggle at it myself, as do many artists. I think that the trick is to practice often and try not to tilt in an uneven, jerky motion. Try to tilt out a cloud pour the best you can by rocking it side to side very, very slowly. So going slow is the key to this. Try not to tilt way too fast. It will distort your pattern. Also, tilting a cloud pour out on a square canvas is really tricky compared to a round canvas, so keep that in mind if you're trying to master this particular technique. Of course, the alternative to tilting is actually spinning, and that might be a really good way to go if you're starting out, just to keep that pattern intact and keep it as round as possible. Spinning helps do that far more than tilting does, so keep that in mind. For me, the great thing about cloud pours is that it doesn't matter if you leave a little bit more paint than usual on the canvas as compared to other techniques, because it still dries okay depending on the temperature in your room. And this is how this looked. It was a beautiful pour, as you can see. You can see that gorgeous magenta and the tendrils. The only thing was that the cloud mix was not correct, and you can see a lot of the flocculation in the close-ups in a moment. So getting that cloud mix right is really, really crucial, and testing it out first is critical as well. In this, I used the wrong proportions of satin enamel with pearl pour medium from Vallejo, and I used acrylic paint in there as well. If you're using paint in your recipe, make sure it's a soft body acrylic paint or paint that's not dense. Otherwise, a heavy body paint, white paint, will actually sink and create a mess on the canvas. And tip number 9 is ignoring temperature and environment. Pouring in a cold or drafty room will have a negative impact on your pour. Temperature can also affect how paint flows, so a cool environment can make the paint thicker and more difficult to manipulate. So that's it, folks. That's my 9 tips on what to avoid when pouring clouds. Hopefully you'll avoid all of those things and create beautiful art in the future. Thank you for watching. Up next is Kat's Fluid Art Creations, followed by Sheldon Briscoe of Shell Rock Art. See you there.